And while today's cuts at the Post have been portrayed as a decision to address declining readership, it was decisions made by Bezos and his leadership team that helped put the paper on that path. I mean, after Jeff Bezos decided to cancel the Washington Post editorial board's tradition of endorsing presidential candidates, 250,000 readers canceled their subscriptions. That is a lot. Despite that reaction from readers, Bezos and his leadership team continued their apparent effort to appease Trump. They thought that was a good idea and worked out well. 250,000 subscribers. Let's continue on this path. I mean, a year ago, in what many see as an attempt to placate the Trump administration, Bezos overhauled the Post's editorial board, narrowing editorial coverage to just two topics: free markets and personal liberties, which I will say in retrospect is kind of ironic. I mean, since our tariff-loving authoritarian president has done his level best to destroy both of those things. And then, when the FBI raided the home of a Washington Post journalist, Bezos stayed conspicuously silent. But of course, none of that would ever be enough to stop the good journalists at the Washington Post from doing their jobs and angering Trump in the process if needed, because that's what good journalists are supposed to do. I mean, I spent more than 20 years answering reporter questions on campaigns in the State Department and over years at the White House under two presidents. And sometimes they made me mad. And I knew that when Washington Post reporters like Karen DeYoung or David Ignatius called about a national security scoop, or when I learned that Jeff Stein had gotten his hands on yet another internal policy memo somehow during the Biden administration, or when Michael Shear had gotten wind of a campaign strategy detail or a campaign ad, my life was about to become harder because it was news we weren't ready to have out there yet. But the point is, they were and remain excellent, hard-hitting, well-sourced reporters. That is what they do. Their jobs were never to make my life easier or to make a president of either party feel good about himself. And it certainly was never to make billionaires more money either. It was to report information to all of you. It was to bring to light what was happening inside of government and to hold to account the people leading them. Adults who work in presidential administrations, even when they are being criticized, even when they're annoyed or don't want to pick up the phone, are supposed to understand that, and most of them do. Adults who take it upon themselves to buy legacy media institutions are supposed to understand that. Jeff Bezos used to understand that, or at least he pretended to. Here he was talking about the role of journalism at a code conference just back in 2016.
You don't want to create any kind of climate of fear or chill with respect to free speech norms. One thing that I think is not appropriate that Donald Trump is doing is, I think, working to freeze or chill the media that are examining him. You know, and it's just a fact that we live in a world where half the population on this planet, if you criticize your leader, there's a good chance you'll go to jail or worse. And we live in this amazing democracy with amazing freedom of speech. And a presidential candidate should embrace that. They should say, I'm running for president of the most important country in the world. I expect to be scrutinized. Please examine me. That's a very important cultural norm. And the cultural norms are, without the cultural norms, the Constitution is just a piece of paper.
I mean, that all sounds really good and wise, and that was just 10 years ago. Did he believe what he was saying there? Has he gone through some crazy evolution? I mean, those comments, clearly he has. Those comments came 3 years after Jeff Bezos had already purchased the Washington Post, a paper that already had a long and storied history of holding powerful presidents to account. The paper that broke the Watergate story that ultimately led to Richard Nixon's impeachment. The paper was among the first to connect the dots in the Iran-Contra scandal that would forever tarnish Ronald Reagan's presidency. The paper that would go on to break major stories about Donald Trump, from his horrific comments on the Access Hollywood tape to his efforts to pressure Georgia's Secretary of State to find him votes and overturn an election. And those are just some of the stories the Washington Post has broken, and many they won awards for in the last several decades. Now Jeff Bezos appears willing to trample on the legacy of that storied American institution. And one of the people who contributed to that historic legacy was its longtime executive editor, Marty Baron. In the 8 years Baron led the newsroom, the paper won 18 Pulitzer Prizes and saw its readership nearly double. Today, Marty Baron issued a statement that I think sums up the mistakes made by the paper's owner. And it reads in part, quote, Bezos' sickening efforts to curry favor with President Trump have left an especially ugly stain of their own. This is a case study in near-instant, self-inflicted brand destruction. It's quite a chilling statement. You should read the whole thing. We'll share it as well. But joining me now is Marty Baron. He is, of course, the legendary former executive editor of the Washington Post. Today, thank you for being here. When I saw this news, there's really no one I wanted to speak to more, and I think no one who's more important to hear from. Let me just start by asking you, and we'll share the totality of your statement. But today in your statement on the mass layoffs, you wrote, this ranks among the darkest days in the history of one of the world's greatest news organizations. And that is a chilling statement. I hope it wakes people up who aren't sure about the impact of this. But tell us more about what was going through your mind as you learned what was happening at the Post today.
Well, I thought back to when I joined the Post in 2013. It was a great news organization then. It had faced many challenges, but we grew. We grew under the ownership of Jeff Bezos. He acquired the paper about a year after I had been there. And so he invested. He spoke on behalf of the mission of the Post. He spoke on behalf of the mission of the press in this country, as you just made clear. And so I felt that this announcement today represents a turn back. It suggests that this newspaper with a deep heritage and historically high ambitions is going to retreat. And it's a terrible thing to see a news organization that's been so important to the history of this country retreat the way that this newspaper is doing.
I have so many things I want to ask you about, including the impact and the larger scope here. You mentioned Jeff Bezos, and I tried to capture, as you said, what he said 10 years ago. And you in your statement captured how he was as somebody you worked with when you were the executive editor. He also, I mean, back in 2021, you said also, you told The New Yorker that when Bezos met with his staff, he said, cover me the way you cover anybody and cover Amazon the way you cover any other company. He's reiterated that on several occasions, and he hasn't interfered in any way whatsoever with our coverage. And that sounds great. I mean, this is a guy who's got a lot of money, who was giving money and helping fund a news organization. And today, one of the people who was laid off was the tech reporter who covered Amazon. And I wonder, as those of us who are trying to understand what happened, this evolution, what happened to Jeff Bezos? Or what is this evolution? What prompted it? How do you explain it?
Well, I think I explain it by saying the words Donald Trump. That's what happened, really. Trump came into office again. He had promised vengeance against his perceived political enemies. Jeff Bezos was seen as a political enemy by Donald Trump for one reason and one reason only, and that was the coverage of the Washington Post. We have been very aggressive in our coverage of Donald Trump, and I think for good reason, because he was abusing his power as president. And so we sought out to document that, and we did document that, and that's what a good news organization ought to do. That's why we have the free press in this country. So he feared reprisal against Amazon, which is the source of his wealth, and he feared that the object of his passion, which is Blue Origin, a private space company, would not get the government contracts that it needed. And so he has sought to navigate this administration during the second term. And he's done a lot of things. You laid them out at the beginning in your introduction, all of the things that he's done. The problem is that by doing those things, he's driven away the loyal subscribers to the Washington Post, because this is a newspaper that has prided itself on its independence, and the behavior of Jeff Bezos has suggested to the readers that he is not independent at all. He's actually dependent on Donald Trump. I
mentioned the 250,000 subscribers that unsubscribed after the decision not to move forward with an endorsement. I talked about this a little bit, but I wonder how, I mean, this is all happening with a backdrop of a lot of other threats to our democracy. And this is one of the things journalists cover, including Donald Trump talking about federal takeovers of elections, the FBI going to raid an election office, all things there are a lot of questions about and a lot of concerns about out there for good reason. And now, of course, as we've been talking about, one of our great journalistic institutions, one of the first papers I still have been reading, has been gutted. Do you think the news business writ large is up for the challenge of what is coming over the next couple of years? I should say, what is continuing to come?
Well, I'm concerned. I mean, I think the Washington Post has continued to do a really good job of covering this administration, of holding it to account. I mean, just the other day, they had a terrific story on administrative subpoenas that are sought to get the personal data, online data, for people who have objected to this administration's policies. It was a chilling story, a very important story, and a high-impact story. I am concerned about our ability to endure this administration. We're only 1 year into it. We have 3 more years to go. And the most recent behavior of the administration has suggested that they will put no limits on their aggressions against an independent press. You cited in your introduction the raid on the home of Hannah Nathanson, one of the reporters for the Washington Post. They seized all of her electronic devices, and they've extracted information from those devices. So, and then more recently, of course, we've seen the arrest of Don Lemon and Georgia Fort for covering a protest. We have not seen the use of federal law in that way to arrest reporters who are covering the news. And look, back in 2022, Trump spoke about his desire to put reporters who received national security information, his desire to put them in prison. He said that when they were in prison, they would meet their bride, as he put it, which meant that they would be raped, and then they would be willing to reveal the names of their sources.